Ballard remains today, as it was 60 years ago, just as remarkably on point, relevant to what is going on today, and relevant also to our thinking about tomorrow. We have... Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today, a classic really of science fiction, of British English science fiction, J.G. Ballard, The Drowned World from 1962. Now, Ballard is very well known, of course. He wrote a series of novels that we're going to refer to today, The Wind from Nowhere from 1961 and The Burning World from 1964. A very famous one that was made into an equally, or perhaps even more famous movie, Crash from 1973. The Concrete Island one from 1974, which is a very interesting sort of reflection on modern city living. In fact, that reflection will be pushed in High Rise, which was also filmed. High Rise is from 1975. He has also this very interesting book, Hello America, from 1981, where the plot is that it's sometimes in the future, not very much in the future, and America has been closed off, has closed itself off from the world, and so nobody's seen America for about 100 years. It reminds you of what happened in Japan, of course, in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. And so in Hello America, it's a group of people departing from England, thinking, okay, we're going to take a boat and visit America for the first time. Why did America close itself off? Through a series of America First policies, internal division, and keeping the world at bay. So a prophetic element perhaps there from Ballard. Ballard also wrote an autobiography, sort of semi-autobiography, Empire of the Sun from 1984, and that was filmed by Spielberg. What is interesting about that is that Ballard, even though he lived most of his adult life in England, famously raising his children on his own because he had lost his wife, and writing on the side, Ballard was first educated in Shanghai, and that's what partly Empire of the Sun is, of course, this enclave of British expatriates in the heart of Shanghai. Now, why is Ballard, and Ballard also wrote many, many short stories and more novels than this, of course, but for different reasons that we want to touch upon today. The Drowned World remains one of the main novels of Ballard. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that, and the first one really is that, to some extent, you could say that The Drowned World, The Wind from Nowhere, The Burning World are eco-science fiction. Now, at the time, that word or that expression didn't really exist, if it exists today, to be honest. And it was a strand of science fiction that we are beginning to see, we have begun to see over the last 10 years, perhaps 10, 15 years, perhaps increasingly on the scene. There are different books that have really, tapped into this idea of the environment and sort of ecological approach too. So instead of speculating about technological development, or for example, or space travel or AI, this is a strand of science fiction that focuses much more on the after effect of climate change, something of course we are going through right now. So eco-SF in the sense that in a Drowned World from 1962, basically ice caps have begun to melt and the sea levels have risen enormously. So the book is set in London, sometimes in the future, it's not specified. And by future, we mean that it's exactly like now in terms of environment and technology. So it is future, and it is, of course, a warning, as it were. And water has risen in London as well, up to, I can't remember, 3-4 stories or floors high. So basically most of people have moved out, but those who remain have to live in the higher reaches of buildings and skyscrapers, as it were. The atmosphere in the drowned world, we'll come back to that in a second, is sort of very heavy, very humid. The weather has, of course, begun to become very, very warm and hot indeed. That is why the ice caps have melted, of course. And so it's a combination of sort of exotic flora and fauna now coming into London. Beasts, animals, flowers, plants, trees that were never seen, of course, under those latitudes before, but also the ever-presence of the water like a big lagoon, and, of course, the thoughts that half of London is now submerged, of course, under the sea. Now, it's eco-SF, and as I said, this is beginning to become a little bit more preeminent in science fiction today. But that's not all that Ballard was interested by far. And as I said, Concrete Island, the High Rise are very firmly on the effect of modern living on people. That is, how do people survive in what is essentially, a highly built, unnatural environment. Ballard, in a series of interviews that he gave, has this killing word to say about neighborhoods in Germany in the 70s, where all houses, to him of course, looked the same. Everybody had the same sort of backyard, everybody had the same sort of cars, everybody had the same things. And basically he said at the time that those suburbs for him were the death of the soul. The death of the soul, because there is no way to remain human, completely human, in an environment like this. So you can see here two strands in Ballard, of course, and Crash famously is a rather sex-laden, erotic novel, but the eroticism or the sexual desires, let's say, are combined with pain, car crashes, therefore the melding of the machine and the human again. Yet, we cannot escape that question, which is, well, was Ballard especially, prescient? Could he really see in the future? Could he really predict what was going to happen? And perhaps here it's more interesting to think in different ways about science fiction. Science fiction doesn't have to tackle what doesn't yet exist but could plausibly exist. Full development of AI, like in the Ian Banks novels, for example. The AIs are now in charge of, most of everything really, including spaceships, or the development of any type of technology, or space travel, alien meetings, all those things. Science fiction is also extremely good at sort of trying to foresee what something now, a small thing perhaps, or a very big thing, but it doesn't have to be technology, could evolve in the future, what we could become through it. And for that, of course, you've got to be open to what is happening around you. And that is what Ballard here shows, is that he was very much aware already of what a lot of people were aware of in the 60s, which was climate change. And loads of scientists were already talking about the climate changing, fuel emissions, carbon emissions, all those things changing, influencing the climate, and basically heating up the Earth. And so instead of thinking, wow, so it all happened before it was happening, we should remind ourselves, and science fiction can be a great way to do that as well, is to remind us that no, it was already happening. I'll put that quote from von Humboldt on the screen. Von Humboldt, an immense 19th century German explorer and scientist, was already talking at the beginning of the 19th century about climate change and why climate change was taking place and what the effects were around him when he was in South Africa, for example. So, of course, here we have plenty of examples in the history of science fiction, way too many to list. But if you are interested in out-of-the-way things from time to time, then Adam Roberts, of course, one of the giant of English science fiction today, of science fiction in general, his New Model Army from quite a while back, at least a decade, was based on the idea that there was a democratization of the army. Soldiers were basically pulled immediately as things were happening. So instead of having a chain of command going from someone who's very far away from the theater of operations to the soldier who's actually on it, soldiers were participating individually in decision making. So, of course, there are loads of, that was at the time when Wikipedia was really taking on, and Google and all the other technological changes were beginning to happen on a large scale. Of course, we could refer to all the 1950s, 1960s novels, very much concerned with the bomb, and the development of the bomb, the atomic bomb, of course, computers in general, thinking about the development of computers and AI goes back to the 50s and the 60s easily. Neil Stephenson's, of course, The Diamond Age from 1995, where a girl has basically some sort of e-reader, which is not really an e-reader, it's more an iPad-like, loaded with AI, and that AI becomes, in fact, some sort of tutor, some sort of teacher for her. And of course, you all know about Gibson's cyberpunk novels in the 80s. He coined the term, William Gibson, of course. He coined the term, but not only that, he imagined what a cyber world could be way before it existed. It only existed in tiny form. You had to be aware of those developments at the time to speculate on their possible development. So obviously that reminds us that the main power of science fiction, intellectually speaking at least, it seems to me, is its ability to speculate and to take an existing situation, idea, or possible technology, and not only try to think what could it be in 2 years or in 5 years, but try to think about what it could become in the long term, and more than that, what the effects of having that technology could be on those using it. There is a novel, and I think it's from Asimov, but I'm not sure, it could be Philip Joseph Farmer, in which, and that's written like decades ago, and I can't remember the name, and I've been trying to find it, and I can't, so it's not going to help you very much, but it's to give you an example. In that novel, everyone is basically linked to a mega AI type of computer, which is somewhere located near their ear. So basically they're in constant contact with that machine, and they can ask any type of question. So remember, this is decades ago. For example, what is going to be the weather like? What is the result of this? What is made of this? Or what makes this or that object? How does one play the guitar? How does one build a wall? In other words, people simply, when they have a question, something they don't know, simply ask it to the giant computer, and the giant computer helps them, of course. Now, what do you know? Obviously, one day the giant computer, for some reason, stops functioning. And this is what interests the writer in question, which is, well, what would happen if people became dependent on that technology, or technologies like this? What would they become, and what would happen to them if that technology stopped? And you can ask exactly the same question today, of course, thinking about Google Maps. If you are used to using Google Maps to go anywhere, ask yourself the question, what if tomorrow it stopped working? Now, it may be that you personally can still handle a real map, a map on paper very well, or have a good sense of direction, but think about all those who never, ever in their life had to use a paper map. They would be, of course, in trouble. And the same goes for any sort of technology like this that we can become dependent on. And so the function of science fiction is to speculate not only on the technology and the development of it, but on the development of human psychology, human cognition, human societies, for example. Now, a last word on the Drowned World, because the plot of the Drowned World is basically might be a reminiscent almost of The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, that I'm sure you've read. So because the main character is basically, well, they're trying to leave, they're trying to find somebody, and they're trying to find themselves. Now, what happens in the Drowned World, which is very interesting in terms of Ballard's general approach to things, perhaps, is that the world starts reverting to a more primeval state, to a more primary state. That is, there is some sort of evolution, Darwinian evolution, but in reverse. And basically, everything around the characters in London is going back to a sort of pre-humanoid time, era. This is very interesting because this is also what happens in High Rise, is a novel set in a high-rise building, where in the beginning it's very clear that there are some social, metaphorical stuff going on there, but eventually that society in the high-rise will break down, and most people will revert to a pre-society state. And this was obviously one of the questions that Ballard was asking, and that is, when climate completely changes, when things really start, going pear-shaped, what will happen to the people? How will people react? What will they become? This is a question that was also asked in a completely different way, but in a marvelously well done way, by Chris Beckett in America City, that I can refer you to here. Wonderful science fiction novel, climate-based novel as well, but taking a very different route in terms of more asking what will the relationship be between societies or people, whereas Ballard in that novel and in other novels asked the question, what will happen to humanity and to the very concept of humanity, and are we coming to the end of it? Now, all this in Ballard is also written in a style that perhaps for some we'll get a bit of getting used to. Ballard himself describes what he was trying to do in in different novels, but the idea remains the same, of course. Ballard talked about being a sort of entomologist. And basically he says when an entomologist looks at insects and describes their behavior and what they do when they don't do, he doesn't do that in a warm, mellow, all together on deck type of tone. He adopts a sort of distanced, at times a little bit cold, style or demeanor of writing, because what he does is analyze, describe, and try to understand. He doesn't try to relate to the characters. Now, that is indeed something that Ballard in those novels doesn't necessarily do a whole lot, in the sense that there's not a strong sense of warmth towards the character, and indeed the style can be perceived as a little bit cold. But again, I remind you that there is a point to those books, and it is not simply to develop a story with a good ending or a bad ending, with nice characters and the like. It is really to take an idea, an existing problem at the time, climate change, the role of people in it. But Ballard is not interested in the role of people at the beginning of it. He's interested in what will happen to us when things start going in a direction that we never anticipated, in a direction that runs contrary to the style of living that we developed: cars, trains, phones, big cities. Well, what will remain of all this? And if all this goes because of changing circumstances in the world, what will happen to us people? So Ballard remains today, as it was 60 years ago, just as remarkably on point, relevant to what is going on today, and relevant also to our thinking about tomorrow. We have to start thinking about tomorrow, not only in terms of what can we do to stop climate change or to remedy some of the consequences of climate change, but also what will we become? What kind of world will we have, not only geologically speaking, but also socially speaking, in terms of our ways of organizing ourselves and developing ourselves, or perhaps, as Ballard argues in this book, not developing at all in a sort of linear way, but going back to an earlier type of humanity, and perhaps that is what must happen. Anyway, good reading.